Welcome to the Sounds of Resistance channel. The conflicts between the Ukrainian and Russian military have spread to the whole of Ukraine. The sides are fighting on the fronts day and night for the dominance of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is locked in the areas occupied by Russian troops. Ukraine's first goal is to clear the areas occupied by Russia. The Ukrainian army continues its attacks against the Russian army in line with the targets without interruption. Since the day the Russian army started the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian army has been badly wounded in the attacks of the Ukrainian warriors. According to Ukraine authorities, 80,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. After the defeats of the Russian army in Ukraine, all arrows were directed at Russian leader Putin. In the Kremlin, the voices of Russian leader Putin's resignation began to rise. He was the target of the heavy criticism due to Putin's ineffectiveness against the Ukrainian army. The Russian people are also quite angry with Putin. After the recent defeats in Ukraine, the patience of the Russian people overflowed. The Russian people hold Putin responsible for the deaths of Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Relatives of Russian soldiers who lost their lives in Ukraine cause their sadness and anger to multiply when the bodies reach their homes. The successive bad news in the Russian army in Ukraine caused the anger of the Russian people to be fueled. Russian people, the streets are spilled. Tens of thousands of anti-Putin demonstrators joined the protest, echoing the streets of Moscow with the voice of Putin's resignation. Reacting to the death of thousands of Russian soldiers in Ukraine due to the wrong decision taken by Russian leader Putin, Russian demonstrators set fire to many Russian government buildings during their actions. Russia is boiling like a witch's cauldron. Reactions to Putin are escalating both on the government side and on the public side. Russian President Putin had recently ordered an evacuation from Kherson in the south of Ukraine. Russian commanders continue to work to remove the residents from the Kherson as soon as possible. While the activity continued in the south of Ukraine, the footsteps of the Ukrainian army began to be heard in the east of the country. The Ukrainian armed forces descended like a dark cloud over the Russian invaders in Luhansk Oblast. Ukrainian warriors defeated the Russian soldiers with their attack in Luhansk. The sudden attack of the Ukrainian army stunned the Russian army. Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Oblast military administration, reported that artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Russian invaders in Chervonopopivka in Luhansk Oblast, as a result of which 20 Russian soldiers were killed and 30 Russian soldiers were injured. The Russian army was badly damaged after the Ukrainian artillery hit the Chervonopopivka in the Luhansk Oblast. After the fire opened by the Ukrainian army, the ammunition storage points of the Russian army became unusable. Russian military equipment was burned and destroyed in Chervonopopivka, while the Russian army's stocks of weapons in Ukraine are about to run out. These attacks on the Russian arsenals render the Russian army helpless and powerless. Russian weapons and military equipments are also targeted in the south of Ukraine. The Southern Operational Command of the Ukrainian Army announced that the Ukrainian armed forces last day neutralized 34 Russian soldiers and Russian equipment in the southern part of the front line. In addition, 3 Russian ammunition depots were destroyed in Berislav and Mykolaiv regions in southern Ukraine. The Ukrainian army neutralized a total of 34 Russian soldiers in its attacks through the day in Kherson. During the day, our missile and artillery units carried out a 160 firing mission, said the Southern Operational Command of the Ukrainian Army. With the Ukrainian missile and artillery units targeting the Russian army, many of the Russian army's equipment became unusable. The Russian equipment that the Ukrainian army has eliminated in the last 24 hours is as follows: 2 Grad multiple rocket launcher, 4 tanks, 3 120mm mortars, a Jiatsin self-propelled gun, a Tovt howitzer. In addition to the statement of the Southern Operational Command of the Ukrainian Army, the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 8 attacks on the Russian forces and weapon clusters, the deployment of air defense system, and a stronghold in Mykolaiv, Pervomysk and Berislav regions, the statement said. Each unit of the Ukrainian army continues to prove itself against the Russian army. Over the past day, Ukrainian sailor eliminated more than 50 Russian invaders and destroyed 10 Russian infantry fighting vehicles and 1 armored personnel carrier. The Naval Infantry Command of the Naval Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces made a statement regarding the attack on the Russian army. The military units and forces of the Marine Corps Command of the Naval Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine as part of the groupings continuing to complete the tasks, repelling the full-scale armed offensive of Russia. During the battles, the Ukrainian Marines destroyed 10 Russian infantry fighting vehicles, an armored personal carrier and an armored combat vehicle, and eliminated more than 50 invaders, the statement said. Ukrainian fighters destroyed 2 Russian self-propelled artillery systems, a truck, and 2 armored combat vehicles, inflicting fire damage on Russian positions. Ukrainian paratroopers eliminate Russian infantry. Ukrainian troops destroyed the BMP-1 in the Donetsk region. The air strike forces of the Ukrainian armed forces shared a video of the attack against the Russian soldiers. Video shared by Ukrainian officials, the legendary attack of the Ukrainian 79th Separate Air Assault Brigade destroys Russian military personnel and the BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicle with the crew in one of the districts in the Donetsk region on the day. Of course, this attack of the Ukrainian paratroopers was not his first victory over the Russian army. On October 29, 2022, the Ukrainian Armed Forces Air Strike Forces reported that Russia's 120mm mortar team, personnel and ammunition load were destroyed by Ukrainian paratroopers in the south of Ukraine. Russian leader Putin embarked on new quests to prevent the gains of Zelensky army. Russian leader Putin causes him to act furiously at the defeats received by the Ukrainian army. In the past days, the Russian army attacked the Ukrainian fronts on Putin's order. The Russian army opened fire on the border areas of the Sumy region with artillery, mortars and UAVs. Russian troops struck the ensemble of Krasnopolia with the Russian artillery. About 5 explosions were recorded. Here, a Russian UAV also dropped an explosive device. No casualties were reported after the explosion in the area. The attacks of the Russian army affected the whole of Ukraine. Many housing and infrastructure systems in settlement in Ukraine were damaged. Residents living in cities in Ukraine are experiencing troubled times due to conflicts. In addition, the Russian invaders launched 120mm mortar attacks on the Myropilya community from Russian Gaivo. About 10 explosions were recorded. The Russian army continues its attacks in Luhansk. Traces of the attack carried out by the Russian army in the town of Severodonetsk in the Luhansk region have to come light. In war ravaged Severodonetsk, 80% of the housing stock was destroyed. In the town of Severodonetsk in Luhansk region, which was almost completely destroyed by Russian bombardment. The occupiers accepted compensation claims for the destroyed dwellings of only 38 residents. The Russian army continues to complicate the lives of civilians with its attacks in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people are clamped together to drive the Russian invaders out of their country. Together they face all the negativities that will come in the Russian army. The Ukrainians are united against the Russian army. No attack of the Russian army in Ukraine will be enough to break the resistance of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky seems quite pleased with the heroic struggle against Russia. Zelensky is proud of the Ukrainian people and army. Thank you for watching us.